When we speak about emotions, we not only understand that they are dangerous when they are out of control, such as you may find yourself in a state of anger or rage, perhaps then obviously the danger is clearly real by reason of the fact that by being irrational, there can be no amount of argumentation or discussion that will serve to have an impact on it, such as to diffuse it. At worst, this anger gone unchecked, it will invariably seek to escalate more and more, turning to violence perhaps. It makes no difference if this anger be for something valid or without any cause at all. The outcome is no less predictable. There can be no one among us that can say that such a condition will ever bring about something worthy or good. So by simple deduction we may safely infer that it will only bring tragedy in its wake. Never will you be able to reason the individual out of this state by a logical discussion or a rational thought, no matter how correct you may be. It simply very well may not respond to any such attempt. We do, of course, in many cases all over the world, in every unimaginable incident, attempt to talk the person down out of such a state, but if we do so and it works, it's only because some small part of that person's brain had the ability to inwardly accept something in himself that he alone decided this state of anger or rage is going to result in a very bad outcome. So the prospect and the fear of the consequences he might imagine himself facing if he does not take command of the emotion, a certain possibility of punishment or whatever it entails in his own mind. It really makes no difference because we have laws all over the world in every country, and they are applied differently everywhere you go. Whatever the individual may fear is of no importance. It's only clear that something has clicked in his mind, that he must take command of the superintendence of his own mind, and nothing else can do that but he alone. If you try to communicate or negotiate this emotion away, it most often will not work. Why? The point I am trying to get to is that emotions are not just inherently connected to the heart. That, of course, is one way to look at it, in so much as it is poetic. The real problem is that of what I attempt to first express in the most basic of psychological of terms. The problem with all this is that if the emotional nature of our experience is irrational by definition, then it cannot simply be a matter of identifying that fact and provide nothing else that is at work here. If the proverb says, above all things, the heart is deceitful most, you need to ask yourself, why exactly does it use the word deceitful? Particularly because it is not just poetic, it's telling you something about the nature of our heart and by extension all emotions. The word deceitful is key to understanding what this proverb is trying to explain. As human beings, we are subject to the supernatural unseen world that is just as vast as the one that you can see, and it is filled with entities of deceit and wickedness, and whether you like it or not, it just so happens that our human emotions are subject to the forces of evil and wickedness for no other reason than they remain irrational and are subject to manipulation by such spiritual forces at all times. These forces cannot make you angry or evil or anything at all, but for whatever reason, feel your emotions, whether good or bad, and the very moment you feel one, whether it be those spiritual forces are aware and will immediately attack that expression and seek to escalate it as forcefully as they can, because they have the right to do so by the will of God. It is you who decide to feel whatever you feel. It may be someone else who has caused you to feel and express negative emotion, but ultimately you are the one who is feeling whatever it is. No person or demon can make you feel anything. Only you yourself feel whatever you feel. Once you do, the spiritual realm is given the permission to enter your mind and escalate the emotion or the feeling. So much as you continue to remain in it, they will not stop trying to take it to its ultimate worst. And the only way to combat anger from escalating into violence and even murder, the ultimate objective of these spirits, is to recognize that they exist and will jump into the moment you go into a state of emotion. This is but one of many arguments I am so inclined and most desire to equivocate. The theological propositions I have come to believe and hold with the utmost regard to the validity and presuppose. Presuppositions are but one of the many crucial devices we may employ or offer to clarify. With some degree of intellectual investigation, we may begin to reduce some of the many fallacies we are confronted with. As we search out and sift through so much of our misguided notions about what we may necessarily come to believe about theological ideas and ultimately form our own personal beliefs that we reason to be true in the most objective sense of the word implies, we must postulate it in this more narrowly and admittedly compartmentalized way for the most basic understanding that there is not one truth, but there must be many number of infinite truths. We may consider, explore, investigate, and hopefully arrive at a rudimentary certitude for what we may therefore be able to label as exceptional and objective truth. For the moment and for our immediate purpose, we will not consider subjective truth. Not for any reason that subjective truth is not valid or useful, but it most certainly has its own place and purpose. But as a matter of necessity, consequence at our attempts to arrive at an objective truth, we will inevitably find that we can supply no more empirical data to support it as an objective, and therefore it remains subjective for that reason alone. Keeping this in mind from the outset, I will confess now fully from the start that I will endeavor to supply you with as much objectivity as I can manage to offer. At long last, this exercise is by definition something that almost it may well be true, and as much as your brain and consciousness may accept it, that alone is never going to be sufficient enough to be held as an objective truth. One might better understand this as to say that just because you believe something to be true and have arranged a belief system that you accept and maintain as valid, cannot be so just because you say it is so. If we can accept and maintain and agree on this as a matter of principle first, as a matter of course, then moving forward must require something more than deeply held beliefs. No matter how much comfort they may provide us with, we must surrender any purely subjective beliefs without exception or objection, no matter how compelling its fundamental may be. We must clearly understand that subjective belief is not to be dismissed or invalid on that basis alone. It's only that if we wish to maintain subjective beliefs, we must do so with as much objective proofs as we can be given to support its fundamental premise. There are many things and ideas that compel us to believe in something simply on our own perceptions and experiences, but again, this too cannot be enough to make it true. It may very well be real in the sense that you know something that is because you experienced it and therefore it is real, but reality does not always necessarily follow that this experience or idea, however real it may be, is also true. Truth needs more than experience or perception. Perceptions are always suspect to the intuitive critical mind and therefore wholly unreliable. Belief, on the other hand, is always endowed with something more than perception alone. Perception alone may be an element of the fundamental to belief, but it is not by itself enough to conclude the veracity of its truth. We should insist on more than that if it is to be established as truth. I will try to further expound on this argument that may put somewhat more perspective to its understanding. Though I am at first glance would appear to be altogether different, it does not all the same possess many of the same fundamental elements of its conclusion. That conclusion being most specifically about the nature of irrational beliefs, having not only similar qualities in that they both are irrational, for that alone would have to be obvious in any case, I wish to demonstrate that the brain has a way of absolving them, though that is certainly another process the brain will exercise by some other means, either through its own process or by an outside force that may facilitate the absolution. However, before you need that absolution, you certainly must have something that is relative to compel the consciousness that either it needs or wants to expect to have it, and there may be many people who simply do not have the necessary conscious will or even desire it. We most often refer to those people as sociopaths or antisocial, a very specific psychological distinction with a clear definition and criteria that serves to classify an individual as such. We, through our lack of knowledge, but more likely because we have become so used to using the term, he has no conscience, as a simple explanation of how some people do the most egregious acts that in our mind to find some sensible reason for how it could occur or what would motivate someone to do such a thing, because it is so outside the limits of acceptable behavior, we simply say, he has no conscience. We all understand the meaning in such a statement when applied to such things, but it is not at all quite accurate because the individual in question clearly does have a conscience. For the most part, we may make the statement to that end and not fail to realize that its implication is not to say one indeed does not have a conscience, but rather the meaning must be an allusion to the fact that whatever kind of conscience he may possess is for any number of reasons not fully sufficient to operate that the majority of people have come to regard as normal. Therefore, it must be abnormal in some way. Again, this is too very overly simplistic to its initial association, because abnormality can mean a variety of different things. It may be a congenital problem that never fully developed as a function of genetics. It may be behaviorally expressed as a matter of environmental circumstances that we were never able to progress or evolve properly. This could mean either a biological consequence that could be treated with medication, or it would be a psychological nature that might also be corrected with therapy to correct it. That being said, we almost always mean it to be something that is of a personal failure or weakness. This must mean that such acts that are seemingly incomprehensible to our own collective right and wrong is enough to dismiss the act, as for a lack of any other clear explanation simply means that one's consciousness does not operate properly. Although this basically, in my opinion, is likely to be correct, in most cases it cannot always therefore be the rule. It will always be used as a means to explain shocking and alarming events attributable to people that do such things as completely unacceptable, and so therefore dismissed by the statement he has no conscience. This statement also is saying something else about the person who makes the statement. It is not just pointing out that it is abhorrent, but by stating it, they are expressing an unequivocal statement about themselves. By dismissing the act as a lack of consciousness, it must therefore also mean that they do have one, and under no circumstances could it be violated, because you cannot violate your own conscience. Which brings me to the analogy I wanted to share with you relative to irrationality of not just emotions, but actions of conscious intent. Whatever they may be, they do occur, and much more than we care to realize or would rather like to admit. Some of these, even most of them, I would suggest, are trivial acts of very little consequence, though all the same do occur irrationally. Again, I repeat, not little consequence. Just emotions alone remain irrational and dangerous, as anything at all can be irrational, resolve themselves into a conscious examination of our inward thought processes. They will not respond to a powerful reasoning by others who argue against it.